Welcome back to the Life of Tash Mia. I'm Tash. I encourage you to sit down, buckle in, because today I'm going to tell you how to create a BDSM scene. So one of the things when people are first starting out in BDSM, I often hear is, how do I create a scene? And especially if they're in the dominant role, they can get really stressed and nervous about this. Look, even someone who's experienced can get stressed about this because you're trying to always keep things new, keep things fresh. You want to introduce a bit of variety and you want to feel confident in the scene you're doing. So whether you're new to this or an experienced player, you might want to listen up. So I like to tell people that scenes are kind of like stories. They need a beginning, a crescendo, a climax, and an ending. But before you get to your story, you need to know what is in scope for your story and what's out of bounds. So first step, negotiation and consent. This is where we use our amazing communication skills to discuss with our play partner or partners what our boundaries and limits are, what activities do we consent to. We discuss any safety measures like any injuries they might have or things we might need on hand. Decide on safe words or safe signals if we're not got the ability to use words. And disclosure or any triggers we might need to be aware of. Now, for those who don't know, disclosure is something that you might need to tell a partner before you commence the scene. It's things that, for example, you might be about to do an impact scene and in your past you might have been spanked as a child, and you know that when you do an impact scene it can sometimes bring up emotions and you might get quite emotional and you might cry, which is, spanking is an emotional release anyway, so it might not be uncommon. So because you are doing a spanking scene, I would recommend that's something you would disclose to the person you're about to play with. However, say you're about to do a sensory play scene where you're just doing some light touches on the skin or maybe some blindfolds and you're not really doing any impact play, you don't really need to disclose that in that situation. So it's a bit situation dependent. So what I suggest is to use a kink activities, limits, and boundary spreadsheet. It makes this step a lot easier because what you will have is a list of activities down one side. And then you both will fill this out separately. You'll indicate your level of interest in that activity and also your experience. It will often have a rating system of some sort so you can gauge like where their interest lies and by how much. You also need at this point, even before you've played, you need to discuss what aftercare each of you require post-scene. I also like to discuss what are each of our intents for the play. Have they had a stressful day and want to escape and zone out? Am I wanting to feel adored and worship? Are we working towards any training goals? Do I want to exert my ability to lead and direct? There are many reasons and many different emotions why each person wants to play for that particular day. It changes, and it might change, as I said, from play to play. It might also change between different partners you're with. But I cannot emphasize how important communication is in BDSM play. We are often playing on a very deep level in kink. It's a space where there's a lot of vulnerability, and therefore this requires a lot of trust. So it's through communication that we build this trust. Being able to communicate your desires, your expectations, your boundaries and limits are key to building a successful BDSM dynamic and scene. There's many types of BDSM play. We've got things from impact play, sensation play, to bondage, humiliation. There's many activities, there's many types of play that we can do. So how do you decide on what things to incorporate into your scene? So start with the activities that you both consent to or are interested in doing, keeping boundaries and limits in mind. So obviously don't pick an activity that was on someone's limit list. Look at the things where you both kind of overlap. This is where that spreadsheet kind of helps because you'll easily be able to see which activities both of you are really keen on doing. If you're new, I suggest begin with just incorporating just like 1 or 2 elements at first, and then you'll build your way up to create more engaging and complex scenes. You can start to have more elements in the one scene. You can also start combining elements, which is something I really love to do now. So you might do some bondage while you're doing impact play, because that just takes it up another level and makes it even more exciting. The second thing is planning. This is thinking about where, what, why, and how. So again, kind of like a story, the way you think about it. Again, if you do that activity spreadsheet, it will make this part a lot easier as well. And all that pre-scene negotiation you've just done in the first step will make this part a lot easier to answer. So firstly is where. Like, where are you actually physically going to play? Is it at home in your bedroom? Do you have a special playroom allocated? Maybe it's going to be outside in a pool area. Maybe you're going to rent a dungeon or hotel room. Decide like where you're going to play. Now pick the location with the vibe of your scene. So if you're going to do a bondage scene, for example, think about you're going to need space to allow you to like work or attach the bondage items. Like maybe you've got cuffs, you want to attach them to a bed. Is this a bed that's going to allow me to attach cuffs? Or if you're using ropes, you're going to need enough space to actually maneuver the rope around the person. So it's also thinking about the practicalities of that physical space. The what. So what are the consented elements of the scene? We talked a little bit about this. Is it restraints? Is it impact play? Are we going to be tickling them? That spreadsheet again, or, having discussed the activities, your limits and boundaries, makes this a lot easier to know what you're going to include. Make sure you have knowledge and practice in these elements. Even if it's just practicing on yourself, I can't stress this enough. I wouldn't go into a proper scene, as in it's not a practice scene where you've decided, look, let's just test some things out on each other, which actually could be a really good idea. But I wouldn't go into a scene and perform something I've never done before. I would first research it. There's so much opportunities these days to, research online and look at other people's doing things. And then, practice on yourself. Or like I actually have a martial arts dummy that I practice rope ties on because my husband gets sick of me trying to do it on him. But it's important that you practice. So we have why. This is what is the purpose of the scene? Why are we playing? If you use the intent part in the pre-scene negotiation, you would have already discussed this. So you would know it could be things such as training and discipline, adrenaline rush, connection and intimacy. You just want to zone out and have a stress release. Maybe you want to feel worshipped, adored. Maybe you want to get creative. There's a lot of reasons as to why you want to do this scene. Next, we have how. How are we achieving the above elements? What tools or toys or outfits will we require? If you're doing spanking, are you going to be using just your hand, or are you going to choose to use paddles and floggers? If you're doing a bondage scenes, are you going to be using cuffs or ropes? Maybe both. What will you be wearing? Are you going to want to exert your dominance in latex and leather? So they're feeling, vulnerable and submissive to you. Maybe you'll have them naked just to make them feel their place. Maybe you're doing role play and you're a nurse and a patient, and you decide, having the outfits on are really going to get you into character and make the scene a bit more realistic. So there are reasons behind what we wear, and it's something that you need to choose and think about. The third thing is engage the senses. One of my favorite things in BDSM. I love sensory play. So our senses of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste are so powerful, and you need to consider them when planning your scene. What can you see? What can't you see? This can be what's visible in the room or the space that you're playing in, whether you blindfold them. What do they see when they look at you? Are they allowed to look at you? What's the lighting like in the room? Are you going to have music on? So we're thinking about, sound now. If you're going to have music on, what type of music? Are you going to prepare a playlist? Are you going to take away their sense of hearing by putting on muffs on them? However, remember that if you take away someone's sense of sound or speech, you need to come up with a different safe word. That's why I mentioned safe signals in the beginning. It could be them moving their arm up. It could be them shaking their head, but you need to decide on something else to still make sure you're playing safe. What about the smells? What are the smells in the room? Don't mean that in a funky way, but are you going to light incense or have a candle burning? Are you going to blindfold them and have a guessing scent test? Maybe they get a reward for every right guess, or maybe they get a punishment for every wrong one. You can also do that one for taste, by the way, with a taste testing competition. What elements of touch are there? Maybe it's your leather gloves running down their back or a silk blindfold over their eyelids. What does the furniture or equipment feel like evoke for them? A soft bed versus a hard St. Andrew's cross. Each of these convey very different intentions to the scene. We've got taste. Are you going to make them eat food off your body? Are you going to have them lick your boots? Are there going to be pleasant tastes or things they don't enjoy? These are all details that create a certain atmosphere that should reflect the intention of the scene. So 4, protocol and ritual. These are the rules or guidelines for behavior during the scene. We need to decide whether we want high or low protocol. So this includes things such as titles of address in your scene, such as mistress, sir, pet, madam. There's endless amounts of titles you can choose. It could be positions of stance, standing hands behind back, head down, making them kneel every time you come into a room. Is the submissive allowed to speak? Are they even allowed to look at you without your permission? Do you need to start the scene in a certain position? I always generally start my scenes in what I call position number 3, which is kind of like child's pose with your head down on the ground, crouching and your hands behind your back. You might want to start the scene aligning your breaths together, maybe doing a meditation together, maybe a little ceremony. These protocols and rituals can help establish roles and make the scene actually easier because everyone knows what is expected of them. 5, the story. So now we are in a better place to script our story. You do not need to write like a blow-by-blow account of everything that's going to happen, although some people might get a lot of security in doing this. However, things will not always go according to plan. Even just a little bit, they're gonna veer off the path just a little. It's not always a bad reason. You might just get stuck on activity because you're both absolutely enjoying it. Or you might be doing activity that didn't really work out as you planned, so you decide to maybe switch it out for something else. So you need to have a little bit of flexibility in your script. Beginning should be considered a warm-up. So no matter what I'm doing, I start slower than slow and softer than soft. You can then build up the intensity, but it's much more difficult to go the opposite direction. As in, you'll find that if you start out very hard or very fast, it's quite hard to rein things back in. It's much easier just to start at the other end of the scale and then work your way up. As I suggested, you might want to start with attuning your energy to theirs, placing your hands around their ribcage and doing some breathing techniques together. You might have a ritual of lighting a candle. You might want to blindfold them and start stroking their buttocks, where you start to stroke it more and more, warming it up. And then that might be the crescendo that leads into a bit more intensity, into now doing it with your hand and start spanking them. So this doesn't mean it has to involve pain, by the way. Like the crescendo doesn't mean you've got to like build up to pain. It could also be introducing a new element, such as now you're going to restrain them while you stroke their bum. It doesn't mean you have to build up to pain. BDSM does not have to equal pain. I have done hours and hours of scenes that have not involved pain whatsoever. So the climax is reached when we reach the pinnacle of our scene. It could be allowing them to have their favorite activity, such as foot worshipping. If you're playing on a sexual level, you might allow them to orgasm. And as with any story, we don't just climax and go. We make sure you gently bring each other back down to earth. Especially if you're the dominant, you've restrained them and they've got cuffs on them, you might want to, give a little massage to their wrists and ankles or something where the restraints were. And then you'd go into your aftercare. So number 6 is playtime. It's time to play. It's time to let your prep pay off. We've planned our scene. We've thought about, what the beginning is going to be, what's the crescendo, what we think the climax is going to be. It's now time to play. So don't forget about communication. We need open, honest communication during the scene. It is absolutely vital. Ask and let each other know how it's going, and you might need to make adjustments if that's required. You can still do this while keeping the scene going and keeping a nice natural flow to the scene. You can do it just with the tone of your voice, do you like that? Or did you prefer it when I was more soft and slower? You don't really need to stop the scene and be like, are you liking this? Do you want me to go back to being softer and slower? You can kind of keep it within the mood. Also reading your partner's body language and especially their breath will also help inform you where they're at. In BDSM, we do not just communicate through words, we communicate through our bodies too. As a dominant, I believe it's my role as the caretaker and the facilitator of the scene to be able to read my submissive's body cues. Are they breathing too fast? Are they breathing too shallow? I might take this cue as I need to slow things down. They could be in pain. So I might tell them to take some deep breaths with me for a while. Are they holding a lot of tension in their body or their face? I might try asking them to release that pressure or maybe redirect that pressure into another type of energy. Faces speak 1,000 words. You will often be able to tell someone how they're feeling just by looking at their face. They might think that they're hiding it, but often we will reveal how we're feeling in our face. So look at their facial expression. Look at their body movement. If someone's kind of, leaning their body away from you or away from what you're doing, that might mean that the intensity's got a bit too high for them versus someone who's kind of wiggling it towards you. That might indicate they're ready for you to ramp it up a bit. If you're questioning any of the cues that you're getting, simply ask. Again, you don't need to do it in a way that compromises the scene. It could be, is that getting a little bit too much for you, my pet? Or does that bottom need a little break from the flogger? So, make sure that you take their feedback and then act on it. If they answer yes, my bottom needs a break, don't just keep spanking their bottom. You need to change. You need to then maybe give their bottom a nice soft rub or whatever it might be to calm down that scene. You also need to be prepared for when things don't go according to plan or when things go wrong. The first rule of this is to stay calm. By getting worked up or stressed out is not going to help anyone. This is why we have first aid kits always nearby. It's why we have our phones charged. We should have food and water on hand. Lollies are a good one to always have nearby during a scene because often it's sugar levels that can drop with intense play. So that's a good one just to give them to get their sugar levels quickly back up. Sometimes the activities we try just flop. Butt plugs fall out when they're not meant to. or you can't untie a rope you've done. That's why we have rope cutting scissors on hands. But it can be funny, and you should laugh when things are funny. Like, not if something serious has happened, obviously, but BDSM is not a serious business. It's play. It's meant to be fun. So, once you've attended to and resolved any problems, as I said, pending what it is, you might return back to the scene. Or you might decide that you've had enough of play and go straight into aftercare to discuss, what went wrong and why, and maybe how you could prevent it in the future. 7 is check-in and aftercare. So once your scene has concluded, it's really important, as I said, not just to get up and leave. It's good practice to have a check-in and talk about what went well and what you could do differently next time. Immediately after the scene ends, attend to any wounds or pressure marks from restraints, massage any sore areas, and administer aftercare as you previously agreed in your pre-scene chat. Aftercare is different for everyone, and it can also be different for every person depending on the intensity of the scene they did that day. So you might need more or less of it depending on the scene type. So one day I might just need a hug, and another day I might feel like going for a long walk, even just alone. It just really depends on what the scene entailed and, what feelings and reactions kind of came up during that scene. But aftercare gives care and support to each other after engaging in the scene. I say each other, both dominant and submissive need aftercare. It's not just for the submissive, which is something, unfortunately, is more portrayed. It's an essential part of BDSM and play. So as I said, aftercare varies greatly for everyone, but it generally includes, physical and emotional comfort. It can be things such as cuddling, putting a blanket on you, maybe having a nice warm cup of tea together, gentle touch, offering reassurance. Often a dominant can sometimes feel a bit of a dom drop, which is where they kind of have a bit of a crash post scene, because they've been in this dominant role, that they've been maybe administering things, or especially, post a humiliation scene, and they might start to get a bit worried whether you actually enjoyed it. So offering a dominant reassurance post a scene is actually really helpful for them. Verbal affirmations, very similar, that you're happy with the scene, or, saying what went well. Engage in open communication, address any emotional or physical needs or anything that came up at this point. As I said, it might be going on a walk together. It might be having a bath alone. It could be stretching and moving your body. 8, the last step in creating a BDSM scene is clean up. Look, there's nothing worse than leaving a big mess with no plan in place as to who's responsible to clean up. So make sure it's something that you account for pre-scene. Also, make sure everything is cleaned and sanitized and safely stored away for next time. So I hope you enjoyed that, and it's given you some ideas about how to feel a bit more confident creating your next scene. So as always, stay kinky.